Okay, let's start. So we have our recipe here that we're going to be following. I've added grams along with cups, teaspoon measurements for making conversions easier for you. So let's begin with diluting our sourdough starter because it's so much easier to deal with a liquidy version versus a hard dried version. So our recipe is going to call for about 1 3/4 cups. That's 380 grams of water, along with our 100 grams of starter. Okay. And we'll just give that a little stir. And next is going to be our flour. So our flour is actually about 4 1/4 cups, and it's a bread flour and about 1/4 cup of whole wheat flour. I normally use my mill to grind up our whole grains, but not everyone has that to their disposal. And again, this is a quick sourdough, so let's get to it. Alright, so we're going to sift our flour here. Now, do you have to do this? Not really. Is it a good idea to? I think so. Mostly because it helps to aerate the flour and break down all of those little chunkies that you may not see when it's whole. Like, look at these big guys. Whoa, that's unusually large. So I'm just going to go ahead and add my salt to this mix. And that way I can use my spoon here to mash that up. It also helps to provide extra air for your microorganisms that are going to be digesting your flour. And that is what's referred to your actual sourdough starter. So we're going to finish mashing that up, and we're all done. Bam! Now we're just going to simply add that to our mix. Get my glove on and start mixing. So what we like to do here is just to use our fingers like a little mixer and just start to incorporate the dry and the wet together. It's nice to use a glove because that way if you need to answer the phone or deal with one of your children or anything else, you can simply pop off that glove and you got a nice clean hand. So you see how this is just starting to become a sticky mess? That's what we want. If it's too dry, then it's going to be not only difficult to mix, but also won't have enough air and water to give you a good lift. Because it would just be a little too dense for you. So try to make it slightly wetter than you would normally handle. So that way you can get a good texture in your final result. So now I'm going to just grab it from the bottom, pick it up, and fold it over. See, now the kneading has begun. The mixing is done because all of our dry and wet ingredients are one cohesive mass. You see, I don't really have any dry flour except for potentially a little bit around the rim, but that's okay. So we're going to simply continue to do that for the next minute or so. The dough will tell you when it's done. Not so much the stopwatch, although that is a good gauge as a benchmark to assist you. But in essence, you will start to begin to see the flour create an elasticity to the dough, because that gluten structure is starting to form with the introduction of water and the enzymes starting to create the protein molecules. It's pretty cool, the science of. So we'll continue on here, folding. And you see I'm not folding it this way, because in essence, if I did that, I would no longer create the tension. You see how I'm slowly unfolding what I did as I move? my hand, right? Versus this way, you kind of create a little twist of tension. And that's what you're looking for in this session of kneading, to create tension in the bread. It forms that structure, that strength that will hold your dough together, especially when you're mixing at the end. So we're coming up on almost our couple-minute mark here. Sometimes they tell you to do this for 5, 8, 10 minutes. Really, they don't know, because they don't know what you're working with. So it is a guideline. Again, you might have a larger batch. You might have a whole wheat or a light all-purpose or bread flour versus a rye versus a kamut, spelt, any of those ancient grains which will absorb water different, have different elasticity properties, etc., etc. So again, what you're looking for is this stretching, and it's starting to create a nice fold and acting as one uniform ball of dough versus looking like cottage cheese, all lumpy and chunky and breaking easy. So at this point, we're going to call it done for our kneading session. And we'll be back soon. Here's a baker's tip for you. After I'm done mixing and kneading, I've got this rim here of kind of dried flour and little chunks of dough everywhere. So I'm just going to mist that lightly, then cover it with saran wrap so that the humidity will soften that up. And then when I go to mix again, I could just scrape it with my bench scraper, and it's so much easier to work with, and you don't have like these little globs of dry flour dough messing up the overall texture of your dough. Okay, so it's been about half an hour while I cleaned up a couple things and cared for the kiddos, get them ready for school. We're gonna go ahead and scrape that, which comes off so much easier now that the dough is hydrated, and we can continue on with our next step, which is going to be giving it a fold, a stretch and fold. Okay, at this point we're just trying to build strength again, so pulling and stretching. So I'm going to grab about, my pinky's about halfway down the dough ball, and but yours could be different, and that's okay. In essence, you're just trying to grab and stretch. So now we could let this sit for about another half hour or so and do the same stretching. Probably not as many, because as time goes on it starts to get firmer and firmer. So you might only be able to do that a couple of times versus like the 6 or 7 passes that we went, or folds. So at this point I'm going to transfer it over to a oiled container, and I'm going to use this because it gives me marks. So this is roughly 1,000 grams of dough. So we're going to take a closer look here. So when everything all settles down, it'll be around 1,000 marks. So double obviously will be the 2 mark, and then I'll shape it and put it in a oiled tin. Now you could let it rise in here, but it's kind of difficult to tell because obviously it's not a straight wall shape. So gauging when it's doubled in a bowl is a lot more difficult than in a straight walled container. Boom. We'll cover this up and let it rest until it has doubled. Okay, so our start time here is about 12:12. Let's see how long it takes for it to double. Given the fact that we used a sourdough starter who hadn't been fed in about 2 days, normally I feed my starter every day the very least, if not, I'd say every 12 hours, so it's 2 times a day. But the consistency is key, so if you're constantly feeding it maybe once every 3 days, and then once every day, and then once every week, it throws off your ability to judge time for a specific schedule. So given the fact that this is a consistently fed starter, except for this experiment, to show you that you can make bread with a more sluggish or older sourdough starter, let's guess here approximately 6, maybe 7 o'clock p.m. to shape this for its final rise. Let's see. Well, good morning. She's finally doubled, but it's now 7:42 on the next day. Alright, time to do our shaping. Let's remove it out of our container using our handy spatula on our lightly floured counter. Sprinkle a little bit on top. And now do our rough shape. One more fold because it was kind of a looser dough, so this way we build up a little bit more tension. Our final touches using our bench scraper. And there you have it. A nice loaf shape to be transferred into our pan. Voila! Okay, the time is now 9:25. And our dough is now ready, so it's fluffy, right? Luckily we have it in a pan because you see all these kind of wrinkles and bumps and that little tear that shows shininess. Just a little bit of shininess there. That, especially that big hole, these are all signs of overproofing. So if we didn't have this in a pan, which is holding its shape, and as it expands in the oven, really the only place for it to go is up and over, that is. If it was a free-form loaf like this, it would basically flatten out, just like this. You'd have just weird breaks in the dough versus when you score it nicely, it opens up with a nice ear, with a nice design. But that's why we use the pan. So let's do it. And let's go. So let's go ahead and stage that there nice and safe. Because we are dealing with an oven, it's at 450 degrees. I'm not going to score it because at this point, well, it's not going to really work out. The dough is just so loose, so sticky even. So if I tried to take my blade, it would probably just get caught. Just because it's just not nice and firm, nice and taut. So when you slice it, it opens up nicely. But that's okay. Again, why we're using a pan. Okay, that's the bread at 5 minutes. Alright, that's about 10 minutes. Our timer just went off. Let's check our progress. Looking pretty good. Got a little bit of an oven spring. Could use a little bit more color, so let's put it back in for about 10 minutes. Alright, it's been another 10 minutes. Ooh, the crust is looking much nicer. Let's go ahead and transfer that over to our cooling rack so that we can get ready for the next step. So now, if your bread did not come out easily, you can always use something to pry the sides with to break it loose. This one, I imagine, will pop off pretty easy, like so. You got some nice coloring, nice hollow sound, and she smells lovely. Again, not too much oven spring, but luckily it did open up at least nicely versus blow out off to the end on a side there. So we'll keep it. We'll let her cool and then cut into it.
Whoa, that's dope. That's
There you go.
Can we eat it?
Can you eat it? Yeah, try it. So here you can see the final texture of the bread. You want some butter? Yeah, especially the end. But if you try a small piece, so you get actually more bread than crust, then that should be a little bit more what you're used to. There you go. All right, thumbs up. Thanks, guys.
Bye!
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching the bread yummy yummies.
Remember to like and subscribe.
Yeah, and we're putting butter on bread.
Awesome.